It's on.
Is there anybody there?
You're a minute late. I wonder if
I don't think people come late.
it just says tag friends, shared a group. Oh, here's one.
Does it say who it is?
No. Oh,
Don't mess with it too much.
I don't know. It just showed up before,
Oh, okay.
but no, there's two. Oh, Maureen.
Okay.
Wave.
All right. Hi there. Welcome to the back of Tim J. Leary Studios here at Backstreet Art District in Palm Springs. This is what's becoming the monthly art talk on the first Wednesday of the month. And I'm looking forward to talking about one of my favorite topics, which is perspective drawing in particular. So the idea for this actually came out of something I said in the last talk that someone commented on, and it was an offhand remark about David Hockney, and so we'll get back to David Hockney later, but it's a really interesting topic because it's something that's actually kind of near and dear to my heart. Perspective drawing is something that I started doing probably in high school when I was doing drafting. So before I get too far along, it's Wednesday night, and I've got a little libation. So I have a use for this little flask. I can put my libation in here. Okay, get every drop. Okay, cheers. So I used to teach perspective drawing at FIDM as well as do it. But for me, the history goes back to my drafting days when I was working for an architect, for Potter in Union, New Jersey, and father and son company. And I would do some drawings. I would redraw some of their stock plans, which was great learning. But drawing by perspective is something that, at the time, I thought, of course, was a perfect and magical system. And it's a really good system. And it comes out of the Renaissance. I cannot remember the name of the person who was credited with it, but thanks to him. However, it's not perfect. So, what I want to look at and talk about here are various ways to do this, because this is the European method, and that was the comment that I got. Was this is the way that we understand drawing of depth and volume in our artworks from Europe, in our Eurocentric culture. It's not the only way to do it, but it's something that is done. So here's a textbook, and I will show you a couple of things from the textbook. My cameraman Stu here, if you would come, I think this one on this page, can you see it? That's a really good depiction of that. It's one-point perspective, and it's the one that we're most familiar with, I would say. There are a couple more. And there are other examples of it, but I think that one really shows it. So it mimics the fact that if you stand, and you can test this if you live in a place where there's a street that's long enough, the street will eventually disappear, right? And it'll go down to one point. All the lines converging. Here's an example, two examples. One is a lovely example of a two-point perspective drawing, which is this one on the right. This is a drawing of a building, which is mostly how this is used. When I was 20 or 21 and I first started in college, I started in a program called illustrative drafting, and this is the sort of thing that I was going to do. That was going to be my career until the college ended the program because there wasn't enough. But here is a use of these with these figures on this other side, on the left side page, where those same principles are used to depict a human figure. Now, there are a few things that, a few principles of, don't ruin the work, a few principles of this kind of drawing. One is the points, and then the other is that there are a couple of characteristics. One, the books will say diminution of size, which I think is a mouthful, but meaning that the farther away something is, the smaller it appears in the drawing. There's also something called atmospheric perspective, which has to do with how precise and how sharp the lines are. Something at a distance is a little hazy. And you know, go out to your window and take a look outside, you'll see that that's true. So that's one of it. The other is overlapping of forms, and that's something that's always also often used. I'm going to skip that one and go to this one. Here's another one, and we'll see an example of this later. This is something called three-point perspective over here. Well, all of these are. And it's not something that I ever had to actually do, but it's sort of a bird's eye view. And I'm going to show an example in a few minutes of that sort of thing, so we'll come back to that. So here's the textbook. So I loved teaching perspective drawing. It was a lot of fun. And often a challenge for the students. So now, this is depiction of depth and volume. Now, volume is also depicted through light and shadow, so that's kind of a separate matter. But the thing to keep in mind that even though these things look like they have some dimension to them, or depth, the picture having depth to it, you step away from that, every single thing you look at, no matter how far away something looks in a painting, is still marks on a page or marks on a canvas. It's a flat surface, and the artist's skill is to make it appear as though it has a shape that you recognize. So one of the things as I was getting ready for tonight was I wanted to look at something really old to see if there's any attempt at that. So I have this old book. Hildegard of Bingen was an abbess in the 12th century in Germany, and she was one of these multi-talented people. She wrote music, and she did paintings, and she also was sort of a powerful woman challenging bishops and popes. You know, you go, you go, Hildegard. But her 12th century paintings are a little evidence. I can't say for sure that this is always true, but I have seen this sort of thing before, where there isn't a lot of depth. She drew pictures of ecstatic visions that she had. So this one here on this page has to do with the church, Mother Church, and the group of people up here, I think, is the only thing that might have a little bit of depth, but notice that the heads are all the same size, even the ones behind. So one of the things that eventually came out of this perspective style of drawing is this change of size. I had another one here where I felt like she was making some attempt at creating pictures, but in this case, she drew her three things in separate spaces. So, as an interesting note, however, a side note, I talked a little bit about Leonardo da Vinci last time, and he lived, I don't know, when did he live, in the 1500s? And if I'm wrong, you know, please correct me. But here is Hildegard's drawing, and I'm leaving the postcard here for a second. Hildegard's drawing of one of her visions, and it reminds me of the Vitruvian Man, but it is at least 300 years before Da Vinci painted or drew his Vitruvian Man. As I was putting this together, I came across this great postcard of David Bowie looking an awful lot like his version of the Vitruvian Man. So, okay, catch my breath for a second. So, the one thing I like to take a look at is influences a little bit. There are other methods of accomplishing this sort of goal, and so my favorite to think about are 19th century Japanese woodblock prints. So I have some pictures here to show, and I'll show this one here. This is one of them. This artist was Hiroshiga the second, I think. Second or third, I'd have to go look at my notes. And in here, he does diminution of size. You can see it here, it gets smaller. And he has overlapping forms. And so those two things, and a little atmospheric perspective, his colors in the distance are different from his colors up close. He uses this beautiful blue ink. And this is one of those works. So in the 19th century, these marvelous images started to appear. Now, Hiroshiga, there are a couple of famous artists. One of them is Hiroshiga, again, if I'm mispronouncing his name and you know better, please tell me. Also Hokusai, and Hokusai is famous for the big wave of those that era. So these are all 19th century prints, paper prints, that were done in Tokyo, actually, is where these artists are from. So again, the same technique that Hiroshiga III used. Now, this artist was the son-in-law of this artist, and when he divorced his wife, he changed his name back to whatever it was before. So I think he was the second. Anyway, that was a typical custom of the time. And this one, I'm going to come back to that one in a second. This one here, he's also using the rain, right? So these are woodblock prints, which means a couple of colors. Look at this beautiful blue that's down here. I'm sure the original prints had a color almost the same as that. This ink was developed around that time in Japan and became very popular in these prints. These prints were done rapidly and cheaply. They were sometimes used as wrapping for goods that were then shipped to Europe. And they got there, and the European artists started to become interested in those. You know, Japonism is the thing that followed. But then some of the artists became really interested. So here we have this particular print. I've got something different there. And here we have this book. So this side is what I want to show. Do you see here? That's the same as that. Their colors are different because of the printing. But the one on top here was Vincent van Gogh's version in oil on canvas of this woodblock print. There are 2 or 3 specific prints from Japan that were painted by artists. I think Van Gogh did 2 of them. They were very interested in these
because their approach to creating these pictures and putting these things together was different than their own approach. So, and what else did I have saved here? Oh, well, I have this one that I showed you already with the rain on it, and this here is here's Hiroshige's version, and here is Van Gogh's version. Very similar. Well, not just similar, it's a copy. It's copying. And so, let's see what else have I got here. I thought this one was interesting because of the atmospheric perspective. These mountains in the distance, and also because of the length of it. If you've ever seen any of these in a museum, some of these are quite long and quite wide, and sometimes on rolls. I've seen them at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco looking like that. And this is mostly, this depth is created by overlapping forms and by changes in color. The mountain that you see is usually Mount Fuji, usually always Mount Fuji. The bridge theme, also quite a popular theme here. Another bridge, a little longer, Mount Fuji in the background. But the colors of the sky and all of that contributes to the illusion that is created of depth. I'm also interested in, and in this one because, can you see that one without glare? Some trees are coming in front of this. This is the Temple of 500 Arhats. Arhats are images, I guess they would have been figures, statues, of various kinds of people and forms. And if there are hundreds of them, you could go to the temple and you could see someone that looked like your ancestor. And then you could pray for them, remember them. So here you have, here you have the painters of perspective drawing from Europe are now influenced by the Japanese. So there is a little overlap. And so it's hard to say that there's anything specific in any of that. How are we doing here? Okay, great. So I have a couple of other examples that are just sort of in-between examples that I wanted to show in reference to that. These are paintings of the West, but they're more contemporary, modern paintings of the West. This would be a book that that comes from the Palm Springs Desert Museum, which preceded the Palm Springs Art Museum. And in this one, I'm showing this one because of the use of colors, is how this artist depicted that idea of distance. And I wanted to show this one here because this is similar, this is the bird's eye view, is similar to the three-point perspective that I showed you in that earlier book. So here it is used in a painting rather than just an architectural drawing. So, so there's that. And then for any Palm Springs Art Museum friends, this piece, which I'm not sure if it's still hanging on the second floor of, or the third floor of the museum. But again, this curvy line that goes back and goes to that mountain that creates that path and gets smaller, that's part of how you look at this, and it registers in your mind that it's far away. There's a little boy here, but things are far behind him. So, of course, this is a lot more of a complex piece than just that. But this is also using some of those ideas. All right. And then a little sip of this. I've always loved Art Deco, and I think the drafting that I always did reminds me of that. So
here's a book on Art Deco. And here's a perspective drawing of a skyscraper. I would think they'd be very challenging to draw, but perspective drawing is done with tools. You just have to know the formula. But here are some paintings also. A poster of Paris. And here, there's another attempt at making us, of kind of scrambling with our brains in terms of what we're looking at, and scrambling with the idea of depth and distance in a work. And here, a little more straightforward, the trains. I always love these kinds of things, reminding me of things that we see from Berlin, and this is from Berlin. And then I have, I think I have a couple of pieces in here. I'll just show this one, I think. Again, everything goes down to this point. So if someone's drawing something or using these techniques of perspective drawing, their point can be anywhere along the way. Little architectural thing, and just some fun dancers. Okay. So I have one little homage to Picasso. I've often said that Picasso may not be my favorite artist, but I'm totally fascinated by what he did, because his whole point was in challenging things, and he also, interestingly, became more experimental as he went along. He's credited with Cubism. George Braque and Picasso developed Cubism, and so my guess is that someone who's doing something like this, trying to create something new, so maybe something that hasn't been done before, so that they get a little more attention, perhaps. I always felt that Warhol did some of that. He wanted to get attention, so he did things that would get him that, and it worked. And it worked for Picasso and Braque as well. But by doing this, they're challenging our notions of what we're looking at here. And I'm not sure what else I saved here. These drawings are interesting too, because these are earlier in his career, and they're a little more realistic, but his hand is always visible. His feet and his hands are always large. So there's a little foreshadowing for that. I saved this, but I don't have much to say about it, except there was a figure here, and I think the dark figure makes it, is an attempt to make it look like the things in the background are actually in the background. And then back to David Hockney. So David Hockney plays with this idea of perspective, and his commentary is that this one-point perspective is not realistic. It doesn't really look like, things don't really look like that. So he feels that there's not just one focal point, that when you're standing in front of something, you might see several points, that's more realistic. So how does he depict that and challenge us to think about that? It's by breaking things up. So in this case, if you look, not all the pieces match. It's because they each have their own perspective. And he puts them together to create something that is perhaps a little bit more like what our actual visual experience is here. So, and I have another one here that he did, the same place, all four seasons, but with 9 cameras. So he drove through this street in a vehicle that had 9 cameras on it, nine, and made these films all at the same time, and then put them together like this to create another appearance of that.
I wish I was in a classroom and I could say, does anybody have any questions? But there's another, and I maybe didn't save the page, where he did a series of videos of jugglers, and he did a series, same technique, a series of cameras, each one with its own perspective, and the jugglers who moved around might appear from one camera to the other, but it's not seamless, it's not one thing. And it's something to think about. He's in a flat thing. I mean, we're trying to create the appearance of distance and form in something that's on something that's flat. So what are our challenges? And there are quite a few, right? So we do our best and we make things that we think are pretty and or interesting and attractive. And so I think that's an interesting challenge. So I like to show a little bit of what I have done. I did a series of paintings a while back, a while meaning 10 years ago, maybe more, maybe 12 years ago, something like that. Something like that, more like 10. And where I took some form and then placed it in a perspective, box. So in this case here, in this painting, which I eventually did a canvas version, although I think I like this paper version better. It's acrylic on paper. These lines here that run along these edges are actually from sketches of the mountains I did in Palm Springs when we would be visiting Palm Springs back in those days. And then eventually drew them here as slabs of something, which I then placed in this perspective box. I think I did 3 of these pieces. And I had a lot of fun doing it because I kept wanting to go back to it. I've done a new series, or I'm working on a new series of geometric drawings. I'm calling them geometric expressions. We'll look at them in the gallery in a moment. And I framed a few of them, but I also have included in these 2 that are here a little bit of perspective. I'm doing these with my drawing board, creating the shapes and designs with my T-square and my triangle and circle template, and putting it all together and then using colored pencil to render it afterwards. And then here's another smaller version as well. So these have not made it to the frame shop yet. So how is our time? We're doing great. So let's Stu, will you follow me into the gallery? I have a couple of new things. I can hear an echo. A couple of new things happening. So these are the geometric expressions. And I've numbered them that way, and they're on my website. If you haven't seen my new updated website, timjtheory.com, go and check it out, because these 4 and their frames appear on there. I love how these look with the colored mats. I think they really pop, pulling out the colors and just ready for the perfect Palm Springs mid-century getaway. So those are new. I'm really excited about those, and they're still in the process of forthcoming. And then with these 2 of these, 3 here to go together. This one here and that one are new wood assemblage pieces that I've called my quarantine project.
Name of the website.
Name of the website, timjtheory.com. All of the people can. So I did these during quarantine. So this I'm calling quarantine order. But then as you can see, I've been doing this, playing with this idea of wood pieces on the canvases for the last year or year and a half, and having fun, and now adding patches, sewing, stitching things on. And then finally, on this side, well, two things. Richard Dodds is still here. His work will be here at least through the end of July. He's changed his exhibit a bit just the other day, added a piece, bottom left. But his works are images that start with photography, are developed digitally, and then printed on aluminum. So these 5 are printed on aluminum. The aluminum is, of course, rigid and very shiny, creating these really bright, vibrant, luminescent pieces. I love them. And then this side, my other works. I think I might have pointed this one out last month, but here it is again. This is on maple plywood. I cut the shapes myself, and then in the painting added pieces of canvas, pieces of an old painting that I cut up and repurposed there. These are next to it because the colors coordinate. I must have done them at a similar time. And these are paper on paper. There's watercolor paper in the background that paints a couple of shapes, and then I add other pieces and create a collage of those. Again, geometry. I love geometry. Let's take a walk over here and look at T's work again. This is T's Florentine series, and I think what's interesting about these, all 5 of them, there's an X over the top. They're also in really haunting colors that give us a sense of what we're going through right now and how uncertain we feel, and how perhaps projecting a little bit, but projecting we're feeling a little out of focus. So those are my comments for tonight. I have 2 more pieces of mine. Cool. And they look terrific. 2 more pieces of mine that are not really new, but I think fit in with the work that's here. So this piece here, which is a collage, a canvas with the other pieces of painted paper that I have added onto that. And then a large one that's 6 canvases actually, but hung in 3 pieces because it's 8 feet long from one end to the other. And I think if it was 1 piece, it would be awfully wobbly. I've added other things to that. So all of this work, and all of it really, is including the colored pencil drawings as well as the pieces with the added things, the added factors, the added elements, are all an exploration of how things look together. What are these colors like together? What are these textures like together? How do they feel? And also, how is it arranged? As an old visual merchandiser, when I was doing a window display, I used to think of that as a 3-dimensional collage that I was creating. I was bringing things together that were not necessarily things that would have gone together otherwise. I put them together and I arranged them in a way that made them look like they fit. So that's my story for tonight. So I thank you for coming along and watching me. I am very happy to have appointments here at the gallery. I am open. I'm only here on Fridays and Saturdays at the minute as a regular schedule, but I am able to be here any day of the week. We live very close. I would love to see if you can get my phone number on that website, timjleary.com. It's one word, TIMJLEARY.com. And you can contact me through email or by phone, send me a text, and I would be happy to meet you here and spend a couple of minutes walking around and looking at the art. So, Sláinte, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.